welcome back to my channel, Hasty Books. I'm Camilla and I want to wish you a happy new year wherever you are. I hope you're safe, I hope you're well. I'm just recovering from COVID. Made it back home to Scotland after being in Canada for the holidays, and it was lovely to take a break from everything. But not so nice way to start the year with a bit of sickness, but getting better. Hopefully now it's behind me and the year can get better. I had lots of plans, especially in December. I plan on doing shorts, to have a bit of an advent list of my favorite books of 2024. And I didn't really follow through with that, I have to be completely honest with you. I think I only posted a couple times. I got to Canada and honestly I needed a break from everything. So that's what I did. I read lots, I did so many puzzles with my mum, and ate lots of food and talked a lot with my parents, my brother when we went out, and saw all my family. So it was just so good and I needed to step away. But I thought coming back, it's not 24 books like I had planned for the advent, but I decided to still share my favorite books of 2024 because it's always great to hype the books that we love, right? So I decided to go with 15. I know we all love a top 10 books, but this is top 15, or you can call it top 10 plus 5 as you wish. These titles are in no particular order, are they? Oh, they're in order that I read them. Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi is one of my all-time favorite reads. I reread it in January because I think there was a rereadathon in December and I didn't get to it because we moved house and everything, but I read it in January and it still holds up. It's so good. It is kind of multi-generational. Each chapter is a vignette or a window into the lives of the descendants of these two sisters from Africa, one that has been sold into slavery and one of them who end up marrying a slave trader. And you get all the way to modern days, going through so many different eras. It is a superb book. I think one that would be great paired with some nonfiction even. Like I read this year Tia Miles' All That She Carried, which was listed for the nonfiction prize, a women's nonfiction prize. And honestly, I think that was so good and great to pair with this as well. Next, we have another book I read early in the year, and it is A Teen Toundra by Joséphine Bacon. And this is a text that has both the French and the Inuit one, as the author writes in both languages. And it was so beautiful and lyrical, and it's a real treat into sort of the world and the landscape of First Nations, especially sort of north of Quebec and stuff like that. So beautiful. I think this is an extremely good book if you're just trying to start reading poetry from First Nations authors in US, Canada, sort of the North American region. I think this is a great one to start with. It has been translated in English as well, so really big recommend for me. Next, we have The Secrets of Hartwood Hall by our favorite Katie Lumsden of Books and Things, from the community. And it came out in 2023. I read it in early 2024 and I absolutely loved it. I think when I mentioned it previously in one of my wrap-ups, and it's always a worry when you read a book by someone that you sort of are familiar with, that you're like, oh, I hope it actually lives up, because I want to hype them and I want to be their biggest fan. And honestly, I didn't have to try to be the biggest fan because it was just a really good Victorian novel, like written from today. Just if that's the kind of stuff that you like to read, Katie knows her stuff in Victorian literature and it shows in the way that she's written this novel. The main character is a widow that's taken a role of governess in a big house for this mother who has a son, and there are weird things happening in the house, and it's very gothic and it has the vibes and it has a great ending as well. I don't know what else to say to hype it up more. If you love Victorian novel, if you love a gothic vibe and you love reading from like maybe more sort of modern sensitivity, I think this is a great one. And I have on my TBR to read Katie's second book probably next month, so very excited about that. Next, we have In Defense of the Act by Effie Black. This was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. I bought it because I couldn't get it anywhere else from a small independent publisher. And it sounded just so interesting and very controversial. A lot of people were like, oh, the subject, don't want to talk about it. And I absolutely loved it. I think it's one of the books this year that stayed with me the most and the longest. Like, I still think about it sometimes. I still bring it up sometimes as well. It's just so beautiful discussion about what we add to the world, our place in the world, especially, I guess, from a queer perspective in this book, and the pain and the mental distress and just identity. There's just so many things that go with it. On the subject of the act, I will not say the word, but if you have heard of this book, you will know what I'm talking about. If you haven't heard about it, I encourage you to go and look it up. And if it interests you, it just sparks a little bit of interest, I really recommend you read it. It is really, really beautifully written. I did hate on the font a lot, but you know, get over it. Next, I have Rebent Sinner by Ivan Coyote. And this was potentially my favorite queer read, if you discard this one, but like nonfiction of the year. This was for the Reading Around Across Canada challenge. I was really struggling to find an author from Yukon, and as I've been trying to read across Canada, I've been trying to mostly read from women or people from marginalized gender and marginalized identities. And I asked a friend about an author from Yukon, and because she'd lived there, and she recommended Ivan Coyote, and I was able to find Rebent Sinner, which is one of their books that discuss of their own journey, but also takes on like politics and patriarchy and basically existing within this world, very much so, as a performer and an artist that is non-binary. And I thought it was just really good, powerful punch, really and really short, so it does pack a punch because it's so quick. And yeah, if you haven't heard of this author before, I really recommend you look them up and read one of their books, because I thought it was really interesting to get their perspective, because obviously that's not one that I would know and have experienced before. So yeah, really, really good. And I encourage you to look at Ivan Coyote up. Next we have what is potentially my favorite read of the year, but it's so difficult to compare such different books, you know, as you see through my list. Like, it's very different genres. But Soldier Sailor by Kilroy, this was the top of my list for the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2024, and it's also really stayed with me. It really packed a punch as well, and I bought a copy. I actually listened to it on audio, and then I bought a book. I saw it in the cherry shop, I think, and I was just like, oh, I have to have it. It's basically almost like a mother discussing her postpartum experience with her son and with her husband and just within herself. I thought it was really, really powerful as someone who's like, you know, on the fence about children. So yeah, I just thought it was a roller coaster of emotion. I thought it was really well written. I know some people say it's quite sometimes a bit flowery and full of metaphors and stuff like that, but I just thought I just really went with it. Basically, the style really like called to me. So for me, it really worked. And I thought it just was a beautiful homage to that sort of start of a new chapter in your life, I guess, to become a mother. And I know I don't have that experience, but I still thought, wow, oh my god, that sounds horrible, and oh my god, that sounds so beautiful, and oh my gosh, I really feel for her. And you know, I really went through all of that with the character. So I thought Kilroy did an amazing job doing that for someone who hasn't experienced it. So yeah, I really, really loved it. All right, let's finish up with the Women's Prize for Fiction books that are on this list. The last one is 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster by Mirinae Lee. This was actually on my predictions as kind of a wild card. It sounds so good and so interesting, and so I thought it would maybe be on the list, and it was on the list, and I was really proud of myself. And I bought it immediately as well. I pre-ordered the paperback because I think it only came out in like April or something, and I read it and it was so good. It's so weird. It's 8 different sort of sections, 8 different, I guess, personas or lives of technically the same person. The first few ones are a bit difficult because it actually starts in sort of a different order. I think it starts with the 5th life. Yeah, the beginning is like, oh, what's happening? But also I think it pulls you in. The premise is that this woman is writing obituaries for people in a retirement home, and to be able to give a voice to these people, you know, so it's not written sort of without them. And she discusses with a Korean woman, her life, and all these stories come out, and it's like, what is real? It gave me like big fish energy, which is one of my favorite films. And I think it's because I like that sort of whimsical creation that you're like, where is the line? Where is the real and the not real? Where is the shocking trauma that has been potentially a little bit disguised or slightly enchanted, or I think this book has that. There are some horrific things in this book. It has some really graphic details of abuse and violence, and it's not easy in certain parts, but I think if you pull through this and you keep going with each chapter and each story, try to see a portrait of this person. I thought it was really beautiful in the end. And again, it's a book that stayed with me because I think it was constructed so unusually, and it really helped me get into it and like bring like the curiosity, imagination for me. Another book that is on my top reads is The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley, and this is another one that is weird and wonderful, I'll call it. It basically has so many different things that it's trying to do. There's time travel, there's like cli-fi, there's like romance, there's thriller, mystery vibes to it. I'm not sure it's doing it all super well, but for me, I went for the ride. It was so fun, and like it really pulled me forward. So I think like this was maybe my favorite like sort of genre bending book. I think one, if you want to read a debut from recent years, this is a really good one. Just came out in 2024, and I just really loved it. Actually, I really want to reread it because I feel like I'm gonna get more from it in the second time. Next, we have two books that were longlisted for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction, and I've tried to read as much of the nonfiction list as possible, but I'm still getting my hands on titles now, so it's taking me a while. But the two that were like at the top of my list was, well, first, let's talk about Eve, How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution by Kat Bohannon. I got that book from the library, and it was so interesting. It's very scientific. Sometimes like I was glazing over certain paragraphs about hormones and tests and science, but generally it told a story and a narrative about female evolution, but also, well, female body, but also human evolution, how we live together, how we've grown together, and our communities and our relationships. And I even cried, like a nonfiction book, and like about science and body and human anatomy and biology, and I cried. So a really, really beautiful one that I want to purchase as well because I loved it so much. And second book was Doppelganger by Naomi Klein. I mean, so good, so relevant to today. I thought it's a book that's difficult to explain what it is, and I think that's why at first I was like, I don't want to read this book. It starts very personal with Naomi Klein talking about the comparison they do with Naomi Wolf. Like, people always mix them up. I have done that before. Let's not go deeper into that story. But so it starts very personal, but once she gets to the more political stuff and on a more global level of how people think and how like black and white thinking have taken over, and basically how we've come into this new world of thinking politically, but also in personal values and stuff. And she talks about, anti-vaxxers and people, like different kind of politics, and just, I loved it. I think she's one of my favorite voices. This was my first Naomi Klein favorite voice, thought process as well. I was like, oh my god, I want to be her when I grow up. Like, so well thought out of like, I understand why these people think that and why these people might get to that point of view. And I thought that was a really balanced way to look at things. So absolutely loved it. Big recommend. Is a chunker as well. I listened audiobook and I thought that was really good. Next, we have another nonfiction book, and it is A Strong Female Character. And no, it's not by Fern Brady. It's actually by Hannah Flint. Actually, every time I Google that title, it's the other book that comes out. But this is a nonfiction about basically the journey of a millennial who grew up between cultures, and what movies have taught her growing up, how she could see herself, perceive herself, what she learned, and how she grew up, basically. And there's different stages and different things about like menstruation and sexuality, and it's very personal, almost like a memoir, but also I feel like it opens up to more experiences that a lot of women will have experienced. And this is a book, I remember I read one of the chapters, I felt so seen about being like a millennial in your 20s and 30s, and sort of that growing up and not exactly knowing if you do want children, and like to want to do so much and want to do so many different things, and like where that fits in. And I just thought it was so good, and I really loved it. And I obviously love movies, so always sort of great to get that little perspective in there as well. So a combination of different things that I loved. So recommend to look it up if you love a memoir and also love to discuss films and the kind of how we grew up with them and what we can learn from them. Next, we have two books that I read from the Booker long list, I guess shortlist as well. First, we have James by Percival Everett. I read Percival Everett, was it last year that I read the first one? And I loved it. And so when I saw that this book was longlisted for the Booker, I got it immediately and I listened to the audiobook, and it was so good. Oh my god, I loved it. I'm not a fan of Mark Twain, but I thought this was a great sort of perspective from the other side. You know, like stories always have these various facets, and sometimes you're like, oh, what about this character? Like, so we get sort of the other side of, you know, the runaway slave that he sort of goes on that adventure with, like Huckleberry Finn, and this is Jim, so James, and it was so well written. I absolutely adored it. And it, yeah, a good one for those that love a sort of reimagine or a different perspective on a historical and kind of classic. So yeah, that's a good one. And the second one is obviously Orbital by Samantha Harvey. Sorry, I've spent too much time in French French household. I read this one. I got it from the library, read it, loved it, and I was like, I don't know what people think about it. So I was a bit like, oh, maybe it might not shortlisted. It was shortlisted, and then it won the prize. I was actually a bit surprised, but I loved it. For me, again, a bit like Claire Kilroy's Soldier Sailor, like the writing really worked for me, and I know some people found it a little bit like nothing. Like there's nothing much that happens. It's very lyrical, very slow, very contemplative, and for me that's something I like, especially in short novels. And I do love a novel based in space and sort of with astronauts and stuff, so I thought that was just really beautiful. And there's lines from it, you know, I was annotating it, there's lines from it that I was like reading to my husband because it really stayed with me. Next, we have a classic that I should have read a long time ago, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Yeah, I don't know why I hadn't read it before. I think I was bored. I watched a series and I found it rough to watch, like some of the sexual violence and like all of that. I was just like, there's a lot going on. So I was really worried about the book, so I've been putting it off, and I was just decided, I think it was in October, November, to read it. And I did, and I thought it was so good. It was so different than I expected. It's not at all what I expected. It's sort of a letter or like a diary of the Handmaid, obviously June from the TV show, whatever, and how she's living through this new era. Sometimes you get like some of the stuff she talks about from the past life, and at the end you get this amazing chapter with the like, oh, we don't actually know the veracity of this. And it was just, I love those kind of things, as we've discussed with 8 Lives of a Century Old Trickster. And yeah, I just thought this was really good. If you've read the Testament, like, tell me if I should read it, because I don't know if it's just her trying to extend the sauce or if it's actually gonna be good and add to this. Let me know in the comments. Thank you. And finally, the last book I wanted to add to this list, and there's so many more good books I read this year, but from the top 15, this is the last one I read for Nonfiction November, and it is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. And I thought it was so good. It was so eviscerating, like, oh my gosh. I had never been sure about reading this because obviously it's a white woman writing about the life and legacy, I guess, of a Black woman, and like what they did to her and her like gene sequence and like her cells. But like lots of people told me that she does it so well, so respectfully, and she really does. I thought it was a mix of like the memoir and the transcription of like conversation that she's had with family and with scientists, but also going back and be like, so this happened in that time and that era, like that kind of treatment, this kind of background for people, and also the scientific sort of evolution of what her cells actually came out to do and how they were taken and all of that. Yeah, so really truly fascinating and sort of immersive look into the life of Henrietta Lacks, but also like everything that happened after she passed away, and like where her descendants have, you know, come, and then where her cells have been used. It's difficult to discuss because cells and like how to feel about that, but it was just so well written. So as a nonfiction book, that was really, really brilliantly done, and it felt personal while also being a bit kind of like, you know, looking at facts and stuff like that. So yeah, excellent book to close out this list. And I'm sure I've gone on for far too long and my voice is starting to crack. So I will leave you to it, but please let me know what your favorite book was if you have a recommendation for me for 2025, and I will be back soon with more videos. Thank you so much. Nice to be back. Bye.